Stephen Sondheim and Hal Prince had a decade-plus working relationship that resulted in such musicals as Company, Follies, and Sweeney Todd. Their last show together before the century was out was Merrily We Roll Along, a look into how three friends grew up and sold out their dreams, staged backwards in time. The failure of that show ended the working relationship between Prince and Sondheim until 2003, when they collaborated on the new musical called Bounce. My name is Dr. Dominique Royam, and I'm a music director, conductor, and music communicator, here to help you achieve a deeper connection to the music you love. Follow me on social media at Dominique Royam for more content. This video is a continuation of my video series about the lives of Stephen Sondheim. If you'd like to play catch-up, I'll put a link in the upper right-hand corner of the screen and in the description box below. Merrily We Roll Along started when Judy Prince, Hal Prince's wife, suggested that his next show engage teenagers, like his son Charlie or his daughter Daisy. Prince immediately began to think about projects that would suit the adolescent outlook and remembered Merrily We Roll Along, a 1934 play by George Kaufman and Moss Hart. Prince immediately called Sondheim, and unusually, Sondheim said yes to the project over the phone. Sondheim disliked stories about people in the theater business, but he was welcoming to the opportunity to go back to the theme of Allegro, the failed Rodgers and Hammerstein musical that moved him so much as a youth. Both Merrily and Allegro focused on failed hopes, blasted expectations, and what happens when someone loses sight of their life's goal. Asking Adolescents to portray the end product, shown at the beginning of the musical, of dissipation and disillusionment was a tall order that Prince tackled when he started to cast the show. One of Prince's most significant problems with the cast of 26, most in their late teens, was the rawness of their talent. Most were unable to get Prince's idea that they were telling adult stories because they had no emotional frame of reference. Prince thought that the show was a natural box office hit and no one would take the moral of the musical seriously. It was just a vehicle to discover some fresh faces in the theater. It was up to Sondheim to write his most conventional score to match the direction. Even though Sondheim said he was writing real 32-bar songs, Sondheim couldn't just let them all sit separately. Instead, he built the separate songs on motivic blocks that interchanged the pieces depending on the characters' interactions. You take a release from one song and make it the verse for a different song, and then you take a chorus from a song and make that a release from another song, and then you take an accompaniment from yet a different song and make that a verse in another song. So it's like modular furniture that you rearrange in a room. Let's listen to one of the hit songs from Merrily, Our Time. It is the end of the musical, so the characters have regressed to the part of the story that matches their ages. It is about the belief in the magic of the future. Here's the BBC Proms 2010 concert, Sondheim at 80.
Something is stirring, shifting ground, it's just begun. Edges are blurring all around, and yesterday is done. Feel the flow, hear what's happening, we're what's happening. Don't you know we're the movers and we're the shapers, we're the names in tomorrow's papers, up to us, pal, to show up. It's our time, breathe it in, worlds to change and worlds to win. Our turn coming through, me and you, man, me and you.
To save money, Prince did not schedule any out-of-town tryouts and instead stayed in New York. This allowed the press to nip at the heels of the production when it was actively changing every night. The production had 50 previews in New York, with bad headlines dogging them and walkouts every night. An article by Liz Smith in New York Daily News entitled, "Not So Merrily They Roll Out of the Theater," came out just 10 days after the first preview. The article read, "The walkouts from the new Hal Prince Stephen Sondheim musical are almost epidemic. There are about 140 people who left after intermission at the recent performance. Terrible and tacky were the words most often being used." Prince said that the article was picked up everywhere and led to mass exoduses from the theater. The show opened to negative reviews and closed after only 16 performances. The most significant fallout from Merrily for Sondheim was the disillusionment of the working relationship with Hal Prince. Prince said that he felt black and blue and told Sondheim that their partnership had run out of steam. Prince and Sondheim did not work together until 2003's musical Bounce. Sondheim was feeling low, depressed after the disaster of Merrily, thinking about abandoning theater. In June 1982, Lewis Allen approached him, suggesting he collaborate with young writer-director James Lapine on a Nathaniel West novella, A Cool Million, as a musical. Sondheim had already heard of Lapine. He had seen Lapine's play 12 Dreams at the New York Shakespeare Festival in 1981 and had been struck by it. Sondheim said, "I was discouraged, and I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't discovered 12 Dreams at the Public Theater." Sondheim was drawn to Lapine's visually oriented sense of theater and his love of the avant-garde. Sondheim and Lapine had a lunch meeting at Sondheim's house where they threw out the idea of doing a musical of A Cool Million quickly. They did agree to collaborate on another project, though. Rather than a standard structure, they were enamored about the idea of a show structured around theme and variations. They tried putting photos together to see if they could write about the relationships between them, but that didn't work. Then Lapine remembered George Seurat's A Sunday Afternoon on the Island of Grande, Jatte, which he had used in a previous production. Sondheim was also fascinated. He said, "All those people in that painting, you speculate on why none of them were looking at each other. Maybe someone was having an affair, or one was related to someone else." And then Jim said, "Of course, the main character's missing, the artist." When he said that, I knew we had a real play. Lapine and Sondheim brought their new musical, Sunday in the Park with George, to Playwrights Horizons, the Off-Broadway group Lapine was associated with, and its artistic director, Andre Bishop. At the time, it had the second largest budget of an off-Broadway theater, second only to the public, due to some very savvy Broadway transfers. By going outside of the Broadway space, Sondheim was revolutionizing himself. Andre Bishop said, because Stephe was more eclectic in his tastes, or because he was working with someone young and new, he went into what was then a creative remnant of the American theater, which is these non-profit theaters. None of the others, the remaining teams of what used to be known as Broadway writers, did so at the time. And the system was breaking down. It was simply too expensive, too difficult to mount musicals regularly anymore, and Stephe, either because of Lapine or because of something else in him, had a feeling that things had to change after the terrible disaster of Merrily, and did something that was the inevitable right thing in the artistic life of anyone. He threw himself into a different world. He did something quite practical, whether he knew it or not. He found a consistent venue for mounting his shows. He clearly realized that he couldn't be just Broadway directly, like the old days. At a time when many writers I know have shut down or dwell in the past, or wish the old Broadway system they had loved was still existing, he simply moved on, and he grew. His talent changed and refined itself. Mandy Patinkin was cast in the role of George Seurat, and Bernadette Peters as Dot/Marie. This show was the first time these major Sondheim interpreters had been in a Sondheim musical. Patinkin thought that the part of Seurat was the hardest for Sondheim to write because George was Sondheim. Patinkin remembers, Stephe sat down and played this song, which I'd been waiting for days, finishing The Hat, which is also the story of his life. So by the time he was finished, he was drenched in sweat, completely dripping. It wasn't at all hot in there. He was terrified, just terrified. I don't know whether he didn't think it was good, whether he needed our approval, but it's moments like that when I love Stephe forever, because I'm also terrified of the all the time myself. So we're sitting there listening to this, and Jeminanji was in tears, and I'm like, I've got to do this. I've got to do it tonight. So I taped the lyric sheet, just the words, on the back of the sketch pad that I carried and worked on it all day, and I sang it. It was an evening when Mike Nichols was there and all of his friends. As the song ended, the place went insane, an ovation I'd never heard before. And it crippled me for the rest of my life to try and sing that song because I felt I could never do what I must have done then. Let's listen to part of this song, which details Seurat's inner battle over his longing for Dante, his mistress who's leaving him, and the act of creating, which is so revelatory and so transporting that it blots out every other need. Here's Mandy Patinkin singing the role he originated in a recording done between October 21st and 25th, 1985, at the Booth Theatre.
Finishing the hat. How you have to finish the hat. How you watch the rest of the world from a window while you finish the hat. Mapping out a sky. What you feel like planning a sky. What you feel when voices that come through the window go until they distance and die. Until there's nothing but sky. And how you're always turning back too late from the grass or the stick or the dog or the light. How the kind of woman willing to wait, not the kind that you want to find waiting to return you to the night. Dizzy from the hat, coming from the hat.
Sunday in the Park with George opened up in its original run off-Broadway at Playwrights Horizons on July 1983 and ran for 25 performances. At that time, Sondheim and Lapine had completed only the first act, but even that was still in development. The company only performed the two-act show for the last 3 dates at Playwrights Horizons. The show starred Mandy Patinkin and Bernadette Peters, who reprised their roles for the Broadway transfer. The show opened up on Broadway at the Booth Theatre on May 2nd, 1984. The second act was only solidified a few days before the official opening. The show ultimately lost money, even though it ran for 604 performances. It was nominated for several Tonys, including Best Musical, which it lost to La Cage aux Folies. It won the Drama Desk Award for Best Musical and won the Pulitzer Prize for Drama, one of only 10 musicals to win a Pulitzer. Critics were mixed about the show when it premiered. Bernstein, who saw it at Playwrights Horizons, called the show brilliant, deeply conceived, canny, magisterial, and by far the most personal statement I've heard from you thus far. Bravo. The New York Times theater critic Frank Rich wrote, I do know that Mr. Sondheim and Mr. Lapine have created an audacious, haunting, and in its own intensely personal way, touching work. Even when it fails, and it does on occasion, Sunday in the Park is setting the stage for even more sustained theatrical innovations yet to come. The innovation that was before Lapine and Sondheim was Into the Woods. They had new Broadway partners, Juja Seaman Theaters, who made the revelatory leap of assuming they would have to find an audience. The 5 theaters under the Juja Seaman Theaters name tried to create a situation that would allow for a moderately successful Broadway run that would make money back for its investors. Lapine and Sondheim took this in stride and began to look for an idea that was bright and happy. They wanted to write a fairy tale from scratch, but that had daunting problems. Instead, Lapine took what he loved from British pantomime, where several fairy tales would come together for what turned into a madcap romp and created something new. The first act was easy to put together. After a workshop of the first act, Juza Simeon Theaters were eager to try to get it to Broadway after a tryout in San Diego. Into the Woods opened in San Diego on December 4th, 1986, and ran for 50 performances. Act 2 continued to give Lapine and Sondheim headaches due to the severe change in tone. The musical went from light and fun to dark and sinister, with several character deaths. Chip Zien, who was cast as the baker, thought that the darker tone of Act 2 had something to do with the creator's characters. They share a similar outlook. There is a certain melancholic view, a fear of flat-out enjoyment. I have it too, so I understand it. Is it the fear of getting what you wish for? It's more the feeling, be careful or you may be disappointed, an underpinning of sadness. There is something not quite fulfilled that permeates the work. Sondheim dismissed all of the misgivings of Act 2 by saying some people don't like to be surprised, particularly in musicals. They want what they expect. Many of them want what they expected before they go even into the first act. Then, after Act 1, they think they're out to get more of the same. The audience didn't get more of the same. Many theatergoers started to leave after Act 1, thinking the musical was over. Sondheim was criticized for the sentiment in the tale of Act 2, with the song No One Is Alone, which, surprisingly, gave the musical a rare happy ending. The critics saw this song as inconsistent with Sondheim's scrupulous regard for the truth. But as in other places in the musical, it forwards the notion that everyone is connected, and that's how we get past the stark, sad truth of life. Frank Rich of the New York Times described the song as cathartic and beautiful, and thought the song's terrifying opening admonition of "Mother cannot guide you" as a callback to the frantic rant in Gypsy's number Rose's Turn. Let's listen to this number with Chip Zien and Kim Crosby in the recording from 1989 for PBS's American Playhouse.
No. No, don't kill him.
Mother isn't here now.
Things, right things.
Who knows what she'd say?
Who can say what's true?
Nothing's quite so clear now.
Do things, fight things.
Feel you've lost your way.
You decide, but you are not alone.
Believe me, no one is alone.
No one is alone. Believe me.
Truly, you
move just a finger. Say
the slightest word.
Something's bound to linger.
Be heard.
No one acts alone. Careful, no one is alone.
Into the Woods premiered on Broadway on November 5th, 1987. It won several Tony Awards in a year dominated by The Phantom of the Opera. They include Best Score, Best Book, and Best Actress in the Musical for Joanna Gleason. The national tour started in 1988, the first show of Sondheim's that had touring production go out before the show closed on Broadway. Several revivals have been produced, as well as a major motion picture by Disney in 2014. Thank you for joining me in this series about the life of Sondheim. If you want to learn more about the composer, an excellent biography is Stephen Sondheim, A Life by Meryl Seacrest. A link can be found to it in the description box below. Like this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more. What do you want to learn about next? Leave me a comment down below. You can also support the making of these videos on Patreon. These videos take over 20 hours of research to complete, so Patreon is a great way to show your support. The bibliography for this video can be found on my website, dominiqueroyam.com. Interested in seeing my process? I document it on my social media, so follow me for more updates. My handles are listed below. Thanks again, and see you in my next video.